My name is Vivian Cross, and the first time
Keep your
Adrian Moretti
composure.
told me I was
We are
not allowed to
perfectly
leave
safe.
him. His private jet was splitting open over black water at 32,000 feet, with one engine on fire and the ocean rising fast beneath us. That should have sounded like the line of a controlling monster. It didn't. It sounded like a plea. That was the first thing I did not understand about Adrian Moretti. The second was that I had spent 2 years wanting him ruined. And when the cabin dropped and the lights turned red, the only thing I could think was, don't let him die before he tells me what he did to my brother. Adrian Moretti was the legal face of Moretti Transit Group, which was what newspapers called his empire when they wanted to stay alive long enough to publish the next day. Shipping, ports, warehouses, private security, fuel contracts. A neat corporate skeleton built around something far less clean. Men straightened when he entered a room. Rivals lowered their voices when his name appeared on a phone screen. Prosecutors kept files on him thick enough to stop bullets and still somehow never managed to touch him. I worked on the 23rd floor of his Manhattan office tower. Inside the polished lie that his world was just logistics and maritime law. On paper, I was an executive coordinator. In reality, I fixed schedules, prepared meeting packets, rerouted calls from dangerous men, and learned very quickly that the difference between white-collar power and organized violence is often just better tailoring. I also learned Adrian Moretti almost never raised his voice. He did not need to. He had dark suits that looked cut out of midnight, hands that stayed still when other men panicked, and a gaze so calm it made people confess things no one had asked yet. He was not old, which made him more unnerving. 38, maybe. Broad-shouldered, dark hair kept short. Mouth too severe to be called soft. Too beautiful to be ignored. He looked like the kind of man women noticed first and regretted immediately after. I regretted him long before the plane. I regretted him the night my younger brother Noah disappeared. Noah was 26, impulsive, loyal, and stupid in all the ways love makes easy to forgive until consequences arrive armed. He worked at Pier 9 for one of Adrian's shipping subsidiaries. Mostly because I got him the job and mostly because I thought proximity to legitimate business might finally drag him away from the smaller, dirtier mistakes he had spent years collecting. Then one Thursday night he called me sounding terrified. He said he had seen something at the port he should not have seen. He said men were moving sealed containers after midnight without manifests. And one of Adrian's captains was meeting with someone from a family Moretti was supposed to be at war with. He kept repeating, Viv, if anything happens to me. It was them. I told him to come to my apartment. He never did. The next morning I marched into Adrian's office on 4 hours of fear and demanded to know where my brother was. Adrian listened without interrupting. He sat behind a black glass desk with Lower Manhattan spread behind him like territory. 3 of his men stood near the windows. One of them smiled when I said Noah's name. And I remember hating that smile more than I had ever hated a person in my life. Your brother made a catastrophic mistake, Adrian said, my throat closed. Where is he? His eyes stayed on mine, cold and unreadable. Gone. That was all. Gone. No explanation, no denial, no anger. Just one clean word that dropped into my life like a body into deep water. I slapped the folder in my hand onto his desk so hard the papers spilled. One of the men by the window moved. Adrian barely glanced at him before the room went still again. You expect me to keep working for you after that? I asked. No, he said. I expect you to be smart enough to survive it. I did keep working for him. That was the ugliest thing about grief. Sometimes it does not let you collapse. Sometimes it turns you precise. I stayed because I wanted access, records, schedules, names. Something I could hand to federal agents, or to a journalist or to God himself if that was what it took. I stayed because hatred is easier to carry when it has a desk and a calendar and a reason to wake up on time. For 2 years, Adrian treated me with a kind of measured distance that felt almost respectful if you ignored the fact that I believed he had buried my brother in some river no one would ever search. Then he told me I was accompanying him to Nassau for a coastal infrastructure meeting. I tried to refuse. He looked up from a file and said, No, I'm not part of port acquisitions. You are now. I can send the numbers with legal. I want you there. That should not have mattered. It did. The problem with men like Adrian Moretti is not that they control rooms. It is that they say simple things like they have already seen the argument end. So I boarded his jet at 6:30 that evening in a charcoal skirt. Low heels and a fury so polished it almost passed for composure. The cabin looked exactly the way rich men apologize to themselves for being dangerous: cream leather, walnut paneling, brushed steel, 2 silent security men, a bar no one touched. A long strip of window showing nothing but cloud and Atlantic dark. Adrian sat across from me reading briefing notes with one cuff unbuttoned. As if he were merely commuting between versions of power. I kept my laptop open because I did not trust my face. 20 minutes into the flight, he said, without looking up. You're glaring loudly. I typed 3 meaningless numbers. That must be difficult for you. Not especially. I closed the laptop. Do you ever get tired of pretending nothing sticks to you? His eyes rose then, gray and level. That depends. On what? Who's asking? There are men whose calm feels safe. His did not. His felt engineered, like bulletproof glass. You could see through it and still never touch what mattered. My brother is asking, I said. Through me. The air changed. One of the guards shifted near the galley. Adrian set his papers down with perfect care. Vivian, no, don't do that. Do what? Say my name like it gives you the right to end the conversation. His gaze sharpened. You are having this conversation on a plane over open water. Choose your timing with more intelligence. The hatred I had spent 2 years refining moved first. Then tell me something useful before one of us dies. Did Noah beg when your men took him? The guard nearest the cockpit stared at me like I had stepped in front of a moving train. Adrian did not flinch. That was the terrifying part. He just looked at me with something that might have been anger if it had not been so controlled. You are speaking about something you do not understand, he said. Then make me understand. The jet lurched so violently my laptop flew sideways. A glass shattered at the bar. The cabin lights blinked once, twice, then washed red. The right side of the plane dropped. Not turbulence. Not a pocket of rough air. A real drop. The kind that tears a sound out of your body before your mind catches up. One of the guards grabbed a seat back, the other cursed in Italian. From the cockpit came a clipped voice over the speaker. Pressure, loss. Engine fire warning. The words emptied the oxygen out of the cabin more efficiently than any malfunction could. Adrian stood immediately. The jet slammed again, harder this time. Somewhere outside the right window. A sheet of orange flared in the dark. My seatbelt was fastened, but loose. I grabbed for it with fingers that stopped feeling like mine. Everything tipped. My shoulder hit the armrest. The bar cabinet burst open. Bottles rolled. A panel above the rear seats snapped and hung crooked. Then the cockpit door opened, and the pilot shouted, "Brace for impact!" We may have to ditch. May have to, as if there were still choices. The guard nearest Adrian said something sharp in Italian. Probably telling him to sit down. Adrian ignored him. He crossed the cabin against the angle of the fall, one hand gripping seat backs, the other catching the overhead console when the plane shuddered again. A metal case came loose from a storage compartment and slammed into his side. He barely reacted. He reached me in 3 strides and dropped to one knee. Head down, he said. Don't touch me. His eyes cut into mine. Vivian, if you want to hate me later, survive first. I tried to pull the belt tighter. My hand slipped. He swore under his breath, yanked the strap hard across my hips, then pushed my hands down by my lower legs. What are you doing? Protecting your neck. Stay forward. Do not throw your arms up. The plane shrieked around us. I stared at him because this was the last thing I expected from the man I believed had erased my brother. He had blood at his hairline already, probably from the falling case. His jaw was set. His pupils were steady. Nothing about him looked kind. Everything about him looked committed. What about you? I asked, hating how thin my voice sounded. He braced one arm over the seat beside my head. I am not the priority. That's not your decision. A humorless breath touched his mouth. It usually is. The ocean appeared in the window, not abstractly, not as distant dark. It was there, too close, jagged with moonlight. Adrian. His hand caught the back of my neck. Firm and warm. When we hit, open your mouth, do not fight the belt. And listen to me very carefully. His face moved closer until I could see the tiny scar near his left eyebrow I had never noticed across conference tables. You are not leaving me. The impact broke the sentence in half. Everything became sound and force and metal trying to become water. The jet hit hard enough to punch the world white. My teeth cracked together anyway. The cabin exploded into spray. Glass burst inward. Something tore behind us with the scream of a living thing. Adrian's body came over mine just. As the plane rolled, my temple struck his shoulder instead of the window. Water hit us from the side. Freezing and violent. And for one impossible second I heard him grunt in pain directly against my ear. Then the lights died. The cabin turned black. I do not remember unbuckling. I remember cold. Salt in my throat. My knee striking something. A hand at my wrist, then gone. A rush of water dragging me sideways. For one terrible moment, I did not know which direction was up. I kicked, found air, swallowed half of it, choked. Then hit the surface under a sky so full of stars it looked cruel. I was in open water, the plane was not. What remained of it was half submerged 50 yards away. Tail up, nose gone. One wing burning in broken bursts. Debris floated everywhere. Seat cushions, a silver service tray. One of the emergency blankets, a shoe that was not mine. I spun in the water looking for movement and saw Adrian 15 feet away. Coughing hard, one hand wrapped around a piece of torn fuselage. Vivian! The fact that he sounded furious instead of relieved almost made me laugh. Almost. The current pulled us toward a strip of pale land I had not seen in the dark before. Not an island exactly. More like a narrow quay with scrub and black rock on one end. The rest of it only barely above the tide. Adrian pointed once, wasted no words, and started swimming. That was when I understood something the safety card never explains. Surviving impact is only the beginning. Wet clothes become anchors. Salt water steals strength faster than panic can measure it. The night wind cuts through you even before you stop moving. By the time I felt sand under my knees. My arms were shaking too hard to hold me up. I crawled, literally crawled. Spat seawater. Coughed until my ribs cramped. The quay smelled like salt fuel and mangrove roots. Behind me the wreck hissed and popped in the surf. Ahead of me. Low scrub bent under the wind and a line of black stone rose near the far tip like the bones of something ancient. I rolled onto my back and tried to remember how breathing worked. Then I heard Adrian swear. I sat up. He was 10 yards away near the tide line, half on his knees. Half pinned by a section of jagged paneling twisted around his left leg. Water surged around it every few seconds. Dragging sand out from under him, blood ran down his forearm. His shirt was torn from shoulder to waist. The cold, impossible man from the office was gone. In his place was someone soaked, bleeding, and furious at physics. "Leave it," he snapped when he saw me looking. I staggered toward him anyway. "Vivian, you don't get to order me while you're welded to a plane. This section is unstable. So are you." Another wave hit and the metal shifted. His face tightened despite himself. That decided it. I shoved both hands under the edge and immediately understood how stupid the idea was. The panel barely moved. Adrian grabbed my wrist. "Listen to me." "No." It could shear. "Then stop talking and help me." For the first time since I had known him. Something like disbelief crossed his face. Then he planted his good hand in the sand and pushed with me. The metal rose half an inch. I got my shoulder under it. Screamed through clenched teeth. And pushed again. The panel lifted just enough. Adrian ripped his leg free and rolled with me away from the surf an instant before the current dragged the wreckage back. A sharp edge caught his shoulder on the way down. He made a low sound I felt all the way in my spine. We lay there side by side on wet sand. Both breathing like we had stolen something from death and were not sure it would notice. He turned his head toward me first. "You should have let me handle it," I laughed once because the alternative was crying. You were under a plane. I was assessing. You were drowning elegantly. His mouth actually moved. Not a smile. Something stranger, as if humor had found him by accident, and neither of us knew what to do with it. Then the burning wreck out in the surf groaned and a section of wing tore loose. Survival returned. Adrian sat up too fast, swore. Then looked over the quay in one sweeping, tactical glance that made him seem more like himself than anything else had since the sky broke open. We have maybe 20 minutes before the tide shifts farther in. We get what we can now. Just like that. No collapse, no gratitude, no room for shock. We went back to the waterline twice. Between the waves and debris, we salvaged 2 sealed water pouches from an emergency pack. A compact first aid kit, 1 flare gun with only a single cartridge, 3 thermal blankets, a dented metal food case, a small survival mirror, a utility knife, and the wrecked remains of Adrian's satellite phone, which lit once and died with the indifference of expensive technology. We found no other survivors. 1 guard's jacket washed ashore without the man inside it. The pilot never surfaced at all. Neither of us said their names. By the time the tide swallowed the last reachable section of the cabin, my hands were raw, my soaked blouse clung like ice, and Adrian's left shoulder had begun to move with an ugly stiffness that looked expensive in the worst way. The quay was smaller than I had hoped and less empty than I had feared. Not a tropical postcard, no tall palms, no dramatic waterfall. Just a thin rise of scrub, patches of coarse grass, black volcanic-looking rock at the far end. And on the highest point, a ruined concrete platform with the rusted spine of what might once have been a navigation marker. The ocean surrounded us in every direction. Too open to be comforting and too beautiful to be kind. We need elevation, shelter. And to get out of these clothes, Adrian said. I looked at him. That sentence sounds worse when you say it. Good. Sarcasm means your brain is functioning. You're bleeding through half of yours. He touched his temple. Looked at the blood on his fingers as if it belonged to someone less important. Then turned toward the rocks. Can you walk? Yes. That was a lie. But I told it anyway. He knew. Of course he knew. He took the emergency pack, slung 2 thermal blankets over one shoulder, and started up the slight incline without waiting to see whether I followed. I hated that. I hated more that I followed. The concrete platform at the far end of the quay gave us a better view of the water and one invaluable gift. Beneath it, sheltered from the wind on 3 sides, was a hollow space formed by old support walls and collapsed metal mesh. Not comfortable, not dry, but less exposed than the beach. The kind of place you choose when you understand that night can kill politely. We worked in silence for a while because words would have forced meaning onto what had happened, and neither of us seemed ready for that. Adrian rigged 1 thermal blanket over the most open side using wire pulled from the rusted frame. I sorted supplies and tried not to shake too visibly. After 10 minutes he stopped moving, turned and looked at me properly. You're shivering hard. So are you. That is not an answer. It's a democratic observation. He crouched in front of me and opened the first aid kit. His hands were cut across the knuckles, one wrist bruised dark, and his shoulder had begun to swell under the torn shirt. Sit. No. Vivian, Adrian. His gaze narrowed. This is not the moment to test authority. I laughed again, softer this time. Because it came out of me before bitterness did. Authority? We are standing on a sandbar with a dead phone and 1 flare. And yet you are still arguing like I scheduled the crash. He held up antiseptic wipes. Sit down. I should have refused longer. Pride wanted more theater. My body chose otherwise. I sat on the concrete ledge. He knelt and cleaned the cut on my forehead with frustrating care. The wipe stung hard enough to make my eyes water. I caught his wrist on instinct. His skin was cold from seawater and the night wind. Easy, he said. There was nothing soft in the word. But there was control, not the office kind. Not command containment, as if he were holding both of us together by refusing unnecessary panic. You're enjoying this, I muttered. Cleaning blood out of your hair? Yes, I have darker hobbies. That should not have made me smile. It almost did. He bandaged my temple, checked my pupils with the tiny flashlight from the kit, then sat back on his heels. Any nausea? Just professionally. Dizziness? I'm stranded with you. His mouth tilted, brief and unwilling. That was almost funny. The strange thing about Adrian Moretti smiling is not that it transformed him. It didn't. It just made his face look less armored. Which was somehow more dangerous. I reached for the kit. Your turn. I'm fine. That's what arrogant men say before they collapse and become group projects. He did not move. I held out my hand. For 1 second I expected the old refusal. The polished refusal. The kind that made help sound insulting. Instead he looked at me, then very slowly handed over the antiseptic and sat down across from me on the ledge. His shoulder was worse than I thought. The shirt had torn at the seam, exposing a long scrape across the upper arm and a deeper cut near the clavicle where the metal must have caught him in the surf. Not catastrophic, not clean either. Sand clung to the edges when I touched the skin around it. Heat pulsed under the cold. This needs flushing. Do it. No lecture about competence? If I pass out, you inherit the island. That is not motivating. I used one of the water pouches sparingly and cleaned the wound. He did not flinch, not once. But the tendons in his jaw stood out so sharply I could count them in the moonlight. Do you feel pain? I asked. When it becomes strategically relevant, that is the worst answer anyone has ever given me. Then your social life is improving. The laugh escaped me before I could stop it. He looked up. It was only a second. A strange, suspended second. Crash smoke far out over the water, wind snapping. The thermal blanket, salt drying on our skin. His dark eyes on mine with none of the office distance left between them. Then he looked away first. We made it through the night by doing very little and pretending it was a plan. Wind was the real enemy. Not dramatic enough for movies. Just persistent. It threaded through wet cloth, stole warmth from our arms and backs, and made exhaustion feel deeper than it was. At some point Adrian tore a strip from one thermal blanket and wrapped it around my shoulders because my hands would not stop trembling. At some point I noticed he had not done the same for himself. Take the other blanket, I said. No. That isn't noble. It's stupid. It's allocation. You sound like a spreadsheet with a felony record. And you sound tired. I pulled the blanket tighter. I am tired. I know. There are some words that hit harder because they are not decorative. I know, not I'm sorry. Not rest, not trust me, just acknowledgement. It should not have mattered coming from him. It did. The waves kept breaking below the rocks with the same rhythm the jet had made on impact. Every time I started to drift, my body jerked awake, convinced we were crashing again. Once I must have made a sound because Adrian said from the dark. Stay with the rock under your hand, I frowned. What? You're not on the plane, you're here. Put your hand on the concrete. I did. Cold, solid, real, when I looked at him. He was leaning against the support wall with one knee up, eyes open. Keeping watch over black water like sleep had become a luxury item he no longer believed in. Do you ever stop scanning for threats? I asked. No. That sounds exhausting. It is effective. And then, after a pause that felt too honest, he added, Get some sleep, Vivian. I'll wake you if the sea decides to negotiate. That was the first time he sounded almost gentle. The next morning I woke alone. Panic is a humiliating thing when it outruns logic. It did not matter that daylight lay over the quay. It did not matter that our supplies were still there. My body came awake all at once, reaching for danger before memory finished loading. The blanket fell from my shoulders. The space beside the wall was empty, Adrian. No answer. The ocean was bright now, mercilessly beautiful. The wreckage reduced to silver scraps caught in the shallows. Heat was already rising. My mouth felt sanded dry. I stood too quickly. Dizziness flashing at the edges of my vision. And saw him 30 yards down the quay near a cluster of scrub, shirt sleeves rolled. Using the utility knife to hack at something green and fibrous. Relief hit so fast it turned into anger before I could stop it. I walked toward him across the coarse grass. You disappeared. He looked up once. I moved 30 yards. You left. I went to check the vegetation line and see if the high tide brought in anything useful. You could have told me. He straightened slowly. In daylight he looked worse, bruises climbing his ribs. Salt dried white at the collar of his ruined shirt. Eyes shadowed from a sleepless night, and still, somehow, composed. You were finally asleep, he said. I chose not to wake you. That should have been considerate. It felt like abandonment anyway. Something in my face must have told him that. Because his expression changed by 1 degree, less hard, more careful. I am not going anywhere without telling you, he said. The words landed too close to need. I looked away first. Toward what he had been cutting, sea grapes maybe. Or some other scrub I did not know well enough to trust. What did you find? Not food. He wiped the knife on his trousers. A brackish pool on the inner side, not drinkable. Some driftwood higher up the rocks and this. He bent and picked up a cracked orange float the tide had thrown in. If we can get enough dry material, we build smoke on the marker platform. Anyone even looking for us? Yes. The certainty in his voice annoyed me. Because you say so? Because my pilot filed a route. Because a jet does not vanish quietly. Because I have people who will keep pulling strings until something tears. People who care about you. His face closed a fraction. People who need answers. Necessary, not loved. I did not know why that thought came so quickly. Only that it did. The heat climbed by noon. That was the next surprise. After a night of cold wind. The K turned savage under the sun. Salt dried on skin. Clothes that had frozen us before now trapped warmth like punishment. We moved slowly to conserve water, gathering driftwood, seaweed. Dry grass hidden under the scrub line. Anything that might help us build a signaling fire later. Adrian found a jagged piece of reflective aluminum from the wreck and propped it near the concrete marker. I spread one blanket to dry. We inventoried the food tin and found emergency ration bars dense enough to qualify as building material. Every survival story sounds noble in retrospect. It is not. Mostly it is logistics. Discomfort and bad tempers taking turns. At one point I nearly slipped on the rock slope while carrying wood. Adrian caught my elbow without looking. Steadied me, then let go immediately. At this rate, I said. Your file should list me under recurring accidents. At this rate, he said. I may list you under expensive liabilities. I knew your concern had accounting language. It helps me cope. I looked at him sharply. That was a joke. A small one. You should warn people. His mouth curved for half a second. No. By late afternoon we had a better shelter, a crude smokestack. And exactly one working plan. Wait for something in the sky or on the horizon and make ourselves impossible to miss. That was when Adrian's shoulder began to worry me. At first it was small things. How often he flexed his hand. How he avoided lifting the left arm above chest height. The flush moving under his skin despite the sea breeze. Then, while he was shifting driftwood onto the platform, he stopped with one hand braced on the concrete and his eyes closed for one beat too long. You're dizzy. No. That pause had a pulse. He opened his eyes. You are becoming irritatingly observant. The wound is hot. So is the weather. Adrian, he turned fully then. Impatience already on his face, but it did not survive what he saw in mine. Concern, probably, rawer than I meant to show. He looked away first. It's nothing. It was not nothing. By sunset, the cut near his collarbone had reddened at the edges. Not dramatically, just enough to make memory reach for old warnings. Swelling, heat, delayed pain. The kind of details people ignore right before consequences become medical. We ate half a ration bar each and rationed more water. The sun dropped cleanly into the Atlantic, leaving the K gold for almost a minute before the light went gray. I sat near the platform edge with the mirror in my hands, though there was nothing left to reflect. Adrian stood facing the open water as if he could summon rescue through contempt alone. Tell me about Noah, I said. He did not move. You owe me that much. Still nothing. The waves broke. Wind combed through the scrub. A bird cried somewhere inland. sharp and lonely. Finally he said, "Not tonight." Anger came back too easily. "You think surviving one crash buys you mystery?" "No," he turned. "I think you are exhausted. Concussed, dehydrated. And one wrong answer away from walking into the sea out of spite. That's insulting." "It's accurate." "Then maybe start with a useful one. Did he suffer?" The words hung there between us. Too old to be dramatic and too alive to sound calm. Adrian's face changed in a way most people would never have caught. Not weakness, not guilt exactly. More like restraint straining under the weight of something unsaid. "No," he said. The certainty hit me harder than maybe would have. "How do you know?" "Because I know. That is not enough. It is for now." I stood so fast the world tilted. "I am tired of your for now." He crossed the distance in 2 steps and caught my upper arm before the dizziness could turn into a fall. His hand was hot. Not warm, hot. I looked from his fingers to his face. "You have a fever. It's low. You don't know that. I know my own body. Your body is trying to file a complaint." He almost smiled. But the effort cost him. I felt it in the brief tightening of his grip before he released me. "We need fire tonight," he said. "Wind breaks after midnight. If the temperature drops and we stay wet, things get worse." That was the problem with Adrian Moretti. Even when he was losing strength, he remained useful. It made caring about him feel like treason against my own history. We got the fire going with shredded dry grass, bits of wiring, one of the emergency matches, and more stubbornness than skill. Once the first flame caught, the whole K seemed to breathe differently. Light changed fear, not by removing it, by giving it edges. Adrian sat beside the support wall while I fed the fire driftwood in careful pieces. He had taken off his shirt to dry it near the heat, without the black tailoring and controlled posture. He looked less like a myth and more like a man built by old damage. Scar over the lower ribs, another near the right shoulder blade. One pale line across the abdomen that did not come from any civilized profession. "You were not always just a boss," I said quietly. He leaned his head back against the wall. "No. What were you before?" "Young." The answer was so dry I almost laughed. Almost. The fever was climbing. I could see it now. The brightness in his eyes. The flush across cheekbones that never held color long enough in the office to look human. I soaked a cloth from the first aid kit with a little water and held it out. He looked at it. "That is our drinking water. And this is your rising temperature. We may need every drop. We may also need you conscious." That got his attention. He took the cloth from me. But after one pass across his neck, he handed it back. His fingers brushed mine. "You do it." I should have said no. Instead, I moved closer. The heat coming off his skin startled me. Up close, he smelled like smoke, salt, and the metallic edge of blood. Nothing expensive left, nothing polished. Just the stripped-down truth of survival. I pressed the cloth to his forehead. His eyes closed briefly. That almost undid me. Who takes care of men like Adrian Moretti when they are too tired to hold themselves upright? Not assistants, not captains, not the people who need them. Power gathers bodies around a man, but not necessarily hands. "Drink," I said. He obeyed without argument, which frightened me more than defiance would have. The night deepened. He drifted in and out for a while. Not asleep exactly. Just slipping. Fever loosens doors people spend years locking. At one point he said something in Italian too fast for me to catch. At another he opened his eyes and looked at me as if he were surprised to find me there. "You should leave," he murmured. "Excellent timing, swimwear." "Not the K." His voice was rougher now. "Leave me." I sat back on my heels. "No." His eyes sharpened a little. "Vivian. You say my name like a warning when you have a fever too. It's impressive." He swallowed. "You don't know what stays dangerous when I get back." There it was again. "Not if, when, then tell me." He looked at the fire. For a moment I thought he would retreat into silence. Instead he said quietly, "Your brother saw betrayal at Pier 9, not the shipment. The men behind it." I stopped breathing. He saw one of my captains meeting a rival intermediary, Adrian went on. The containers were a cover, the real exchange was information. Routes, security rotations, names of who? People attached to me. I stared at him. And Noah called me because he panicked. Yes. And then what? Adrian's jaw tightened. He called someone else first. My stomach dropped. Who? One of my port supervisors, the wrong one. The fire cracked between us. What does that mean? It means by the time I found out, the leak knew your brother had seen too much. I stood because sitting had become impossible. No, don't do this. Do not start telling me half-truths when you're sick. His gaze lifted to mine. Fever had thinned the distance in it. I'm telling you enough. My brother vanished. Yes, because of you. His voice dropped. Because of my world. That was not the same thing. And it was exactly the kind of distinction men like him used to hide blood inside grammar. I turned away before I said something that would make the night worse than it already was. The storm arrived just after midnight, not a cinematic wall of lightning at first. Just wind changing direction and a pressure shift that made the whole cave feel smaller. Then clouds covered the stars. The air thickened. The first rain came slantwise, cold despite the day's heat. Snuffing sparks and turning the concrete platform slick under our feet. Move, Adrian said, already standing. We dragged the food tin, the water, the flare gun, and the first aid kit into the deeper hollow behind the support wall, while rain hammered the blanket shelter flat. Wind hit from the east hard enough to make breathing feel borrowed. In less than 3 minutes we were soaked again. I hate that weather can make human feelings irrelevant. It does not care whether you have unresolved hatred or the beginnings of something worse. If you stay wet in strong wind long enough, your body simply starts losing. Adrian shoved the metal mesh panel tighter across the opening. Get behind me. Stop doing that. Doing what? Putting yourself between me and everything. It has worked so far, the storm answered for me. Ripping one corner of the blanket free, cold rain drove in sideways. I crawled forward to catch it, slipped, and nearly hit the concrete lip before Adrian caught my waist. The movement cost him, his face went white. And for 1 second his arm around me shook. Your shoulder, later, no. Now. Vivian. You can order the ocean after I look at the wound. Lightning flashed. In that white second his expression was raw enough to frighten me. Not because it was cruel, because it was tired. I pushed him back against the wall and peeled the makeshift bandage away. The cut had worsened exactly the way I feared. Redness spreading. Skin stretched tight from swelling. Heat pulsing under it, not dramatic enough to be hopeless. But too ugly to ignore. It's infected. I gathered that. You're getting chills. I'm wet. You're burning. Also true. Rain pounded overhead. Water ran down the wall in thin streams. The whole hollow smelled like rust and storm, and the stubborn human disaster of 2 people not dying neatly. I used the last antiseptic. Then pressed fresh gauze to the wound and held it there because there was no tape left strong enough to survive that much moisture. His breath caught once. Does it hurt? I asked. Yes, the honesty stunned me. You admitted that. His eyes opened, fever bright. Storm must be serious. I should not have laughed then. I did anyway, and the sound came out shaky enough to embarrass me. Hours blurred after that. The storm trapped us inside a pocket of metal and darkness while the sea hit the rocks below, with enough force to make the ground tremble. At some point, survival overruled pride and Adrian pulled me against his side under one thermal blanket, so our body heat had somewhere to go besides the wind. There are moments the body understands before the mind agrees. His chest was warm, his breathing steadier than mine despite the fever. My cheek rested against skin and damp cotton, and the hard line of muscle beneath both. I should have moved, I did not. Outside. Rain worked at the edges of the quay like it wanted to erase us, inside that ruined hollow. The world narrowed to his heartbeat, and the hand I kept pressed against the bandage on his shoulder. You should still hate me, he said into the dark. I do. Not as efficiently. I shut my eyes. Do not become observant now. His mouth moved near my hair. Too late. Lightning flashed again. Thunder rolled slower, farther out. The worst of the storm was passing.
I don't know what made me ask then. Maybe exhaustion.
Maybe the intimacy of not freezing to death together. Did you kill my brother? I whispered. His whole body went still, then very quietly he said, "No." I lifted my head. He looked back at me through the dark with none of the office steel left intact enough to lie well. "Then where is he?" Adrian swallowed once. "Alive." The word did not fit inside my chest. "No. Yes. No." I pulled back enough to see his face. "No, do not do that to me. Do not say that because you think it will keep me here." His expression hardened through the fever. But not against me. Against whatever memory had finally come up to the surface. The captain who sold information had already passed your brother's name to men. Who would have cut him apart for what he saw? I got to Noah before they did. I stared at him. "You said he was gone." "He was. That means dead to normal people. It meant unreachable." Rage and relief collided so fast I could not separate them. "You let me grieve him for 2 years. I let you believe he was gone to my reach. To your life, to this city, that is not better. I know. No. No." "Adrian, you do not get to say you know." His eyes held mine.
Fever making them clearer instead of softer.
"He begged me not to tell you. That stopped me." "What?" "Because if they knew you mattered to him and he was alive, they would use you to find him. There was a leak inside my organization. I did not know how wide it spread. I moved Noah under another name through people who owed me favors and feared me enough not to ask questions." His voice roughened. "And then I stood in my office and told you he was gone because 3 men in that room were watching your face." Rain dripped somewhere behind us. The storm had become a whisper, but inside me everything was louder than it had been in years. "You could have told me later." "Yes. Why didn't you?"
He looked away, that frightened me more than the confession.
"Finally," he said, "because the longer you hated me, the less likely you were to go looking." The truth hit with devastating precision. I had spent 2 years circling the man I thought destroyed my family. He had spent 2 years making sure I stayed angry enough to survive. "That is not protection," I said. "That is cruelty-wearing strategy. Yes, no defense, no elegant excuse, just yes." I turned my face away because tears felt like failure and I had already lost too much to men making decisions for me. He did not touch me, did not apologize. Perhaps he knew apology would have sounded obscene in that cramped dark. We stayed awake until dawn without speaking much. When the sky finally lightened, the K looked wounded. Half our makeshift shelter had blown loose. The smokestack had collapsed. Debris had shifted higher up the slope. But the marker platform still stood. And beyond it the ocean lay bright and innocent in the way terrible things always do after they win a round. Adrian's fever had eased a little by morning. Enough for him to stand without swaying. My anger had not. "Say it again," I told him while we rebuilt the smoke pile. He was stacking driftwood one-handed, slower than the day before. "Noah's alive. No games. No games." "Where?" He looked toward the horizon. "Dominican coast, 6 months first, then farther south. New papers after that." My hands stopped moving. He could have called. He did. Once, I stared at him. Adrian met my gaze at last. "The night after I moved him, he wanted to tell you anyway." I told him no. There are truths so sharp they make your whole body feel stupid for staying upright. Why would he listen to you? Because he had just watched one of the men hunting him put a knife through a dock worker for using the wrong name. Adrian's voice flattened with old anger. "Fear makes obedience easier." Something in my face must have broken then, because he set the wood down and took one. "Careful, step closer." "I was right to hide him," he said quietly. "I was wrong to hide it from you that long. That almost made it worse."
The balance of it, the unbearable reasonableness.
I wanted clean evil, not complex damage. Not a man standing under a gray morning sky with a bandaged shoulder and a fever admitting he had saved the person I thought he murdered. I turned away and climbed the rocks because if I stayed near him one more second, I might hit him or forgive him or both. The highest part of the quay rose only 30 feet above the water.
But from up there, the isolation looked complete.
Nothing but blue in every direction, no boat wakes, no helicopter beat. No helpful line of mainland on the horizon. Just us and the wreck in a world too large to care. Adrian came up after me more slowly. Favoring his shoulder, he stopped a few feet away. You're going to fall if you keep climbing angry. Then don't follow me. That is not negotiable. I turned. You do not get to decide where I go now. A breeze moved my hair across my face. He looked exhausted and dangerous and infuriatingly solid even while injured. No, he said. I only get to decide whether I let you do it alone. The words landed somewhere dangerously soft. I looked away before he could see that they did. Around noon we saw the first plane. A tiny white cut moving high and fast across the southern horizon. We lit the smokestack so quickly I burned my fingers on the dry grass. Adrian flashed the mirror in hard, precise bursts. I fed damp vegetation and shredded blanket strips to the flame until black smoke twisted up like a signal flare to God. The plane did not turn, not once. It kept going until it became just another lie distance tells. I stood staring after it with the mirror hanging from my hand and felt something inside me sink lower than the jet had. Adrian took the mirror gently before I dropped it. We build it bigger, he said. What if there is no next one? There will be. You don't know that. No. He looked at the sky where the plane had vanished. But panic is a luxury for people with alternatives. I laughed bitterly. That sounds like something carved over the gates of hell. Likely in Latin. The dry absurdity of it almost made me smile. Almost. By late afternoon the sun returned viciously. We moved slower, drank less than we wanted, and rebuilt the signal larger using wreckage fabric and blackened wood. At one point I found Adrian sitting on the lower rock shelf with both elbows on his knees, breathing too carefully. You need rest. I need a boat. You need to stop choosing the more impossible option. He looked up at me. Sweat stood at his hairline despite the breeze. That is not how I survived this long. No, I said before I could stop myself. It's how you ended up alone enough to think suffering quietly counts as strength. That reached him. For a second the old mask almost came back. The one that could reduce rooms to temperature, then it slipped. Maybe, he said. The honesty in that single word felt more intimate than if he had touched my face. Near sunset I went searching the tide line for anything usable and found a half-submerged emergency case wedged between two rocks. It had washed in from the wreck sometime after dawn. Inside were 3 more water packets. A compact orange life vest and, impossibly, a second battery pack for the satellite phone. I ran, not elegantly, not with dignity, barefoot over rock and scrub, shouting Adrian's name before I even reached the marker platform. He turned so fast his balance went with him. I caught his good arm before he slipped. What happened? I held up the battery. The look on his face then is one I will remember even when I am old. Not joy, Adrian did not do joy carelessly. But hope, sudden and sharp enough to hurt. We dried the phone, fitted the battery, and waited through 3 endless seconds. Nothing, then a light, then a flicker. Then the screen came alive. Spider cracked, but breathing. No signal, I whispered. Adrian angled it higher. Jaw tight. 1 bar appeared, vanished, returned. He moved toward the highest rock. I followed. The bar held. He dialed 1 number from memory. The call failed. He dialed again. This time someone answered. I could not hear the voice. Only Adrian's, all control, no wasted syllables, coordinates. Probable crash zone. 2 survivors. Immediate extraction. Medical urgency then. After a pause that changed his whole face by a degree too small for anyone but me to notice. No, she stays with me until retrieval. He ended the call. My heart was pounding hard enough to make me stupid. They got it? Yes. Who? Coast Guard through one of my people. Search radius shifts east. They think we're outside the filed line because of the storm drift. When? Hours, maybe less if fuel and weather cooperate. Relief made my knees weak. Then his words caught up. She stays with me. I looked at him. What was that? Instruction. To who? To the men coming. I heard the sentence. Adrian. He met my gaze without blinking. There is still a leak in my organization. Until I know who sold Pier 9 and who else has loose ends. You do not leave my sight. The gratitude disappeared under anger so fast it made my skin buzz. You do not get to trap me inside your security plan because you finally told the truth. His voice stayed low. This is not about control. That's convenient. It is about keeping you alive. You have a terrible way of making that sound personal. His eyes darkened. It is personal. The words sat between us like lit wire. I opened my mouth, closed it, opened it again. Do not say things like that when rescue is finally coming. Why? Because I do not know what they mean. Something changed in his expression then. Not retreat. Restraint. You will, he said quietly. Later, rescue did not come before dark. Of course it didn't. Nothing that matters arrives on the version of time your body wants. Night fell. We kept the fire high. Adrian checked the phone every 10 minutes. Each time walking a few steps away to find the bar again. On the fourth check he nearly stumbled. I caught him by the wrist. You are sitting down now. I'm managing. No. You are fading with style. He looked at my hand on him, then at my face. Vivian. Sit. Somewhere in the last 48 hours the tone between us had shifted. Not obedience, not surrender. Something stranger. The kind of authority people hand each other by surviving. He sat. The fever was back. Worse this time. Chills under hot skin. Slower responses. The wound at his shoulder angry and swollen under the bandage. I used the last clean cloth to wipe his face and forced tiny sips of water between long stretches of silence. The flare gun lay beside us like a promise that might still become a joke. At one point he said, eyes half closed, if the boat comes and I'm unconscious, you fire it only when they're close. That is the least romantic thing anyone has ever whispered to me. A breath that might have been a laugh moved through him. You have impossible standards. I had them before the crash. And after? I should not have answered. I did. After. I'm less sure what impossible looks like. His eyes opened fully at that. Firelight made them look almost black. Vivian. There he went again. Turning my name into something that sounded too much like touch. Don't, I said softly. Don't what? Look at me like you want something you're not allowed to ask for. A pause then. With the fatigue and fever stripping away every elegant layer he normally wore. He said, I want you not to leave when they come. The ocean kept moving below us. The fire cracked. Somewhere far off, a rotor sound might have existed or might have been wishful hearing. That is not a small thing to ask, I know. You spent 2 years teaching me not to trust your version of protection. I know. And now you want what? Gratitude? Forgiveness? His face tightened. No. What then? He looked directly at me. A chance. The simplicity of it undid more of me than a speech could have. Before I could answer, the phone buzzed in his hand. He looked down, focused, and pushed himself upright with visible effort. They're close. The helicopter found us at 2:30 in the morning. I remember the time because the cracked phone screen glowed blue in Adrian's hand while the first real sound of rotor blades cut through the dark. For one frozen second, I thought I had imagined it. Then the beam swept the water south of the quay and turned. This time it was coming toward us. Everything after that happened in fragments. Adrian firing the flare only when the helicopter was low enough for the red burst to stain the spray. Men in rescue gear shouting over the wind. A winch line dropping, questions asked too fast. Medical checks done with professional hands and no patience for resistance. They wanted me up first. I reached for Adrian automatically. One of the rescue men misunderstood. Ma'am. He's right behind you. No. My fingers locked around Adrian's wrist. Together. The rescuer looked between us. Then nodded once. Adrian's eyes dropped to our hands. For a second, the whole hard architecture of his face changed. Something deep and unguarded moving under exhaustion and pain. Vivian, he said, barely audible under the rotor wash. Don't start. You may regret this. Maybe later. I tightened my grip. Not now. We went up one after the other into a roaring white machine that smelled like fuel. Antiseptic and home arriving too fast, they wrapped me in a blanket. They strapped oxygen on Adrian, despite the way he glared at it. They asked my name, the date, whether I knew where I was. I answered everything except the question that mattered most. Which was why my hand kept reaching across the gap between our stretchers until my fingertips found the edge of his blanket and stopped there. Rescue is not clean. It does not heal. It transfers you from one kind of danger to another, salt water to fluorescent lights. Storm wind to hospital air, immediate death too.
Everything you postponed feeling while survival was busier.
At the hospital they separated us. That was when the panic finally arrived.
Not because I thought I would die.
Because for the first time since the crash, Adrian was out of reach. And my body had begun to equate that with threat.
A nurse touched my shoulder and said he was in surgery for wound cleaning and observation. Nothing catastrophic, fever from infection.
Dehydration, possible rib damage.
She said it kindly, which almost made me cry. Then she told me I had a mild concussion, soft tissue bruising,
and a foot laceration I had somehow ignored for half the K.
People kept saying I was lucky. Luck had a name and a fever and a shoulder wound.
I saw Adrian again the next evening through the glass wall of a private recovery suite. He was sitting up in bed wearing a gray t-shirt instead of black, left shoulder rebandaged. Color still absent from his face but control returning in visible layers. Two men in dark suits stood near the door, another sat by the window working from a tablet. And at the foot of the bed stood Lorenzo Ferri, Adrian's consigliere. A silver-haired man whose stillness made most executives seem theatrical.
Lorenzo noticed me first. That alone told me how dangerous he was. Adrian turned a second later. His eyes found mine.
Something in them changed instantly, softening with a speed that would have gotten another man killed in a room full of predators. Then Lorenzo shifted into my line of sight, and the softness disappeared behind the old mask. There it was, the wall returning.
I should have expected it. I still hated it.
He sent doctors, security, clean clothes. A phone charger, my mother, who had been frantic for 36 hours, was flown in and installed in a suite down the hall before I even woke enough to ask. Adrian handled practical care the way men like him handle warfare, comprehensively and from a distance.
He did not come see me on the second day Lorenzo did.
He entered my room after one quiet knock and closed the door with the kind of courtesy that usually precedes bad news. "Miss Cross," he said. "You look stronger. I feel murderous." A promising sign. He took the chair near the window without asking. Impeccable suit, silver watch, face arranged into something too disciplined to be called unkind. "You are alive because Adrian moved very quickly after the crash," he said.
I'm alive because we both did. A brief pause.
"There."
He folded his hands. Then let me speak plainly.
The events on that K were extreme.
Trauma creates unusual intimacy. Dependency can feel profound under threat. I stared at him.
"If you came to insult me, use shorter words." Lorenzo's mouth almost moved. "I came to tell you that Adrian's situation is unstable. Your definition of unstable includes private jets exploding? My definition includes internal betrayal, external opportunists, and a woman whose brother once saw too much." The room went cold. "So the leak is still active. We are identifying it. And until then?" "Until then, your association with Adrian is leverage." I leaned back against the pillows. "For who?" "For anyone who notices he nearly tore a search operation apart to find you." That hit harder than I let show.
Lorenzo saw it anyway. Men like him saw drafts in sealed rooms.
"You care for him," he said. "I'm angry with him. That is not the same thing." "No," I said quietly. "It isn't." He nodded once.
As if I had passed a test I never agreed to take. Then understand this.
Adrian can protect you more effectively near him than far from him. "There it is," I said. The real reason, Lorenzo replied. is that people connected to Noah's disappearance are now aware you survived with Adrian. If you vanish alone into your former life, you become an easier target. If you remain where Adrian can see you, you do not. The sentence should have sounded strategic. Instead, it brought back a storm-dark hollow. His fevered voice, and the first plea hidden inside an order. I looked away. Lorenzo rose. He will tell you to stay for your safety. You will hear control.
Try to listen for the fear underneath it. Fear?
The old man's expression changed just enough to become human. Adrian Moretti has been feared by most of the men in his world since he was younger than he should have been. It does not suit him to discover there is finally something he fears back, after he left.
I sat with that for a long time, then Adrian sent for me.
His suite was quiet when I entered, the security men already dismissed. Evening light stretched across the floor. The city beyond the windows looked civilized in the stupid way cities do when viewed from private recovery towers. Adrian was standing with one arm braced against the glass. Dressed now in black trousers and a dark sweater that hid the bandages but not the stiffness. You should be in bed, I said. You should have waited for a wheelchair when you crossed the hall. That is not how concern works. No, he said. Usually it arrives wrapped in criticism with you. With you.
Everything arrives wrapped in strategy. He accepted that without argument. For a moment neither of us moved. We had survived a crash. A storm, a fever confession, rescue, separation. And somehow this room felt harder than all of it.
I owe you more than I gave you on the K, he said at last. Yes, he nodded once. The captain who sold information at Pier 9 was Marco Bellesi. He had been taking money from a Calabrian outfit trying to break my East Coast contracts when Noah saw the meeting.
Bellesi panicked and moved early. I got Noah out.
I did not get Bellesi cleanly enough. What happened to him? Missing, Adrian said, which means useful to someone or dead where I can't question him. And Noah now? Safe, confirmed yesterday. My chest tightened. You spoke to him? Yes. The word hurt more than it should have. Adrian saw that. He asked about you first.
I looked at the floor because if I kept eye contact, I might break open right there.
And what did you tell him?
That you survived.
A pause. That you were furious. That some things had not improved. That pulled a startled laugh out of me before I could stop it. His mouth moved in answer, then stilled. Vivian. There he was again.
Saying my name like it had become something fragile in his hands.
I hated you, I said. I know, no. Listen to me. I stepped closer. I built entire years around hating you.
I woke up with it, went to sleep with it.
Used it to survive every elevator ride, every boardroom. Every time you looked through me like you were doing me a favor by not finishing the job.
His face tightened.
And then on that K, I went on, voice shaking now. You gave me water before yourself. Told me my brother was alive, burned with fever. And looked at me like leaving was the one thing you could not let happen. Do you understand how impossible you made everything? Yes, he said quietly. Good, because I still don't know what to do with that. He took one careful step closer.
Not enough to touch, enough to make the distance honest.
Then let me make one thing simple, he said. You are not going back to your apartment. Anger came up on reflex. There it is. You can hate the phrasing if it helps. I do. Good. His eyes held mine. Because I am not asking permission on the part we're men connected to. Bellesi may still be looking for your brother and now know your name. You will stay somewhere secure until I finish this. And if I say no? Then I put security on you anyway, and wait for you to decide whether defiance is worth dying to prove. I stared at him. That is unbelievably controlling. Yes, at least you're consistent. Only about the things that matter. The air changed again. I was tired of pretending not to notice when it did. And what am I, Adrian? That landed. You could see it land. He looked at me with all the discipline in the world, and still answered like a man who had finally run out of lies. He was willing to keep.
The first thing I have wanted to keep safe more than I wanted to stay untouchable.
There are confessions that sound rehearsed. That one didn't.
It sounded dragged up from somewhere deep enough to leave damage on the way out. I should have said something clever, I didn't. Instead, I asked the ugliest true question I had left. Would you have ever told me if the plane hadn't gone down? He closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them again, there was no armor left in the answer. I don't know. That honesty hurt. But it was honest, and after everything, I discovered I would rather bleed from truth than be cushioned by another strategic lie. 2 days later, I tried to leave anyway, not because Lorenzo was wrong. Not because Adrian had been wrong about danger. But because staying inside his reach while half in love and half furious felt like letting gravity decide my future. I packed the small hospital bag, signed the papers, and made it as far as the private elevator lobby before 2 of Adrian's security men stepped into my path. Miss Cross, one of them said carefully, Mr. Moretti requests. I don't care what he requests. The elevator doors opened behind them. Then Adrian's voice crossed the marble from farther down the hall. I do. I turned. He was coming toward us too quickly for someone still healing, dark coat. Sling hidden under the cut of it, but visible if you knew where to look. Face still pale under the city lights. Furious in the quiet way only he could make terrifying. The guards moved aside. I said I was leaving. I told him. I know. Then why are your men blocking the elevator? Because 30 minutes ago a car bomb meant for one of Blaze's former runners detonated in Brooklyn. My stomach dropped. Adrian stopped in front of me, close enough that I could see the